So I'm so happy to introduce Dr. Krishna Swami Dara today for as a speaker for today's lecture. And Dr. Dara is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi. And a very good thing about his biodata is that not that he has just received his PhD degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University, CPS, but on the idea of modernity in Ambedkar's thought, but he was also awarded the Best Thesis Award for 2007 by the Nirman Foundation. And now in 2009, he has got his book published also. So that is something very, 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 very creditable on his part. And Dr. Dara's study he focuses on analyzing critically the neglected political thought of an important Dalit intellectual and Indian leader, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And he has got his other interests in the areas of political philosophy, legal thought, Indian politics, minority issues, Indian political ideas, with special emphasis on minority leaders and thinkers, political psychology, particularly with regard to the Dalit and untouchability, psychology of untouchability and the Dalit psychology, the issues of social recognition and stigma, all the akin concepts veering around the problem of Dalit identity are very close to Dr. Dara's heart. The socio-legal discourse regarding the Dalit problem and the Dalit and the practice in India with special reference to non-religious minorities. These are the lesser known topics which are of interest to Dr. Dara. So today, I very gladly welcome Dr. Dara, and I would like him to start with the lecture, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a legal thinker. Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Dara.
Thank you very much, Professor Shubha Rao. That was a very generous introduction, and I'm very glad and I'm also honored to be part of this 28th Manoranjan Jha lectures series. I'm thankful for the department for inviting me. The aim of my paper or my lecture today is to present to the audience, present to the listener, the basic thought of B.R. Ambedkar's basic thought or basic ideas or the basic intuitive ideas behind Ambedkar's legal thinking. We all are aware that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the chief drafter of the Indian Constitution, and he played a very, very significant role in the framing of the Indian Constitution. Much less people know is that he was a professor of law, and he was also the head of the law Institute or Law College in Bombay, and he spent almost a decade as a professor of law, the teacher of law. Apart from teaching law, he was also a lawyer by profession, so he was also a practicing lawyer in that sense. He was part of many important cases in his time, and so we see Ambedkar in three different phases. One as an intellectual, as a scholar who teaches law. One as a lawyer who fights for rights of the people or fight cases in the real courts. And also we see him as the drafting of the Indian Constitution. Later on, he becomes the law minister. As a minister, he's legislating, he's dealing with the law-making process, not just the constitution-making, law-making process. And also he was in various roles dealing with the issue of law or the concerns of law. And even before he becomes the constitutional committee member, he was already member of many councils where he was. So we can say that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is basically a legal mind in the sense most of his life he spent in law, we can say, or with the law in that sense. It is there has been little amount of work, or there is beginning interest in looking at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a legal thinker, but the work is just beginning to happen, or it's very little as of now. My aim uh, is to see seriously much more than what has happened as a legal thinker, or a jurisprudential philosopher, or a philosopher of law. Of course, most of you might know or not know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar goes to United States, one of the first persons to go to Columbia University. He begins studying law, sociology, and political science. So we need to remember, as I give my talk, that his sociological training, in his initial sociological training, also shapes his way of looking at law. There he comes across a very great philosopher, or one of the greatest philosopher of America in the last century, is John Dewey. John Dewey belongs to what is called the pragmatist tradition. And in this tradition, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was attending his classes. He used to have personal or private talks with this Professor John Dewey. And over a period of time, he was almost deeply influenced by the pragmatic way of looking at things. So at the outset, I want to see that Ambedkar cannot be simply called a pragmatist in the sense, but this pragmatic attitude of looking at philosophy itself, or pragmatic attitude of looking at law, or all aspects of social problems, is something that Ambedkar learns from his great teacher called John Dewey. In fact, Ambedkar is very famous to say that if all the books of John Dewey are vanished from the earth, I can still recite every line of John Dewey. It's a rhetorical statement, but it tells the importance that Ambedkar had for John Dewey. Um, uh, Let me explain to you a bit about what this pragmatist attitude is, and pragmatism, what its role is. Pragmatism, this philosophy of pragmatism, has become unpopular after 60s, and it is now gaining popularity after Richard Rorty's philosophy and the mirror of nature. Now pragmatism is becoming popular, but still it is still not recognized seriously by particularly Indian side, or the Indian intellectual side. Pragmatism as a philosophy is not well understood. This basic pragmatist attitude to philosophy knowledge is basically the pragmatist conception of truth. There is something called pragmatist conception of truth, which says that truth is that which works. Apart from these other two theories, there is something called the correspondence theory of truth, and there is something called the coherence theory of truth. These are the two main contenders, at least in the Western philosophical tradition. And the alternative that the pragmatist tradition offers is what is called the truth is that which works, which means that which works. It's also called instrumentalism in other way, in other terms, but it has been criticized by Bertrand Russell and others, so it became unpopular. But it's not crude instrumentalism as it is normally criticized by its opponents. But truth is something that can be tested, or something that can help in solving our issues or problems. So therefore, this correspondence with reality or truth is something that that everyone has to agree on, is replaced by this what is called this pragmatist conception of truth. So from his initial training onwards, or from his initial training in Columbia University, Ambedkar picks up this relationship to philosophy. The relationship to philosophy is not simply about this traditional conception I was talking about. Philosophy has to somehow what I will call ameliorate human condition, emancipate or ameliorate or improve human life, or to help human solve their problems. So this basic attitude to philosophy we can see from here, from his initial training to end, that is his book Buddha and Dhamma. So Buddhism, or in fact this whole project in life, including his conception of law, is what is to emulate. How can law help us to solve human problems or or to ameliorate the conditions of this? Um, so there he learns in Columbia University, learns sociology and political science, and also picks up these pragmatist traditions. And also pragmatist tradition also has a very famous legal philosopher and a judge called Justice Werner Holmes, and he wrote, he's called the realist school of law. So this realist school of law also looks at law as it works, law as it is experienced by people, law as it is interpreted by judges. So therefore, that realist conception of law is part of this pragmatist tradition. After his initial training in sociology and political science, he moves to London School of Economics, and he does is one of the first Indians to submit a PhD thesis in economics. While doing his PhD, he was simultaneously doing his law. He was entering. He was there. There are 4 inns of court, and he belongs to what is called the Grace Inn. So one is called the Lincoln's Inn, another is called the Inner Temple. There are 4 inns, and Ambedkar belongs to the Grace Inn. The interesting thing about Grace Inn, this particular what is called a hostel, or kind of a hostel where they give you basic skills of how to deal with law, is that this was initially set up by Francis Bacon. The design, the initial inn was so Francis Bacon statue, and the design also was done by Francis Bacon. And we all know that Francis Bacon is very famous for what is seen as the founders of modern science. So that scientific spirit, that sense of scientific spirit, is also inculcated not just within the pragmatist tradition, which is highly influenced by the theory of evolution of Charles Darwin, but Ambedkar's later training also, particularly in law, particularly the Grace Inn training, is also inspired by a lot of belief in science, or to some extent the scientific approach. That approach Ambedkar doesn't give up even in his Buddha and Dhamma, though he certainly is critical of scientific projects can go wrong, but so again, this pragmatist attitude is something that Ambedkar is learning from his earlier training. Apart from that, his experience as a Dalit in India and his experience as an Indian, his experience as a person who comes from an excluded social category, or also may probably helps him, probably aids, or probably is one of the reasons that he prefers pragmatism to other approaches to philosophy, or other philosophies. And very important for us, I will try to come later, is also that he's coming from Maharashtra again, because before the British rule was there in Maharashtra, there was the Peshwa rule. So Ambedkar is very well aware of what are the laws and the rules and laws, and how society was before the colonial law was implemented in Maharashtra region. So in fact, we will come to that point later on. So these experiences also are very, very important. And probably this training, or someone he saw in his college, or someone that's what one of the reasons, or probably his private discussions with John Dewey influenced him to take law. One other reason he picks up law is because he says that a lawyer is a free person. Lawyer, it doesn't work for anyone. He's independent. So it's one of his desires to be independent, not to work under any authority. That is one of the reasons he chooses to be a lawyer, and he refuses the offer of being a judge, because he thinks that judge's job is not as free as that of a lawyer. So so in this sense, these are all these things, from being a student in Columbia University and student in Grace Inn, later on working, later on being a teacher of law in law college, Convent Law College, and also being the head of the college. He was supposed to be a very good his students used to appreciate him as a law professor. He wrote even textbooks for students to understand some. For example, he has a book on law of torts or law of evidence. He has small books written to help his students to understand law. And later on, we know that he plays a very significant role in drafting the Indian Constitution, and also.
दिक्कत तो है ना कि वहां भी तो यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड नहीं है ना.
Sorry, Krishna. You have muted yourself, Krishna. Yeah, please go ahead.
So the overall, but I would like to now come to his thought. Ambedkar, as I was telling, that Ambedkar, because of his pragmatist tradition, is never, because of this influence of pragmatist tradition, is never away from what is the reality. What is the reality of law? How law really works. Apart from that, but Ambedkar also has this other dimension of what law ought to be. This distinction between is and not is something that Ambedkar is trying to navigate all through his legal career, all through his engagement with legality. If you look at Ambedkar's writings, one of the difficulties that we find when we're trying to understand Ambedkar's legal thought, or there is no one single book or a space where he is trying to articulate what he thinks law is. Or what he thinks law ought to be, or in any way. So we only get sparse comments from here and there. So what I am trying to do is to connect the ideas that exist in his writings and to see whether there is a systematic method or a systematic approach to the way he looks at law. And from that point of view, my argument is that Ambedkar does not give up both the ideal side of law, or what is called the ought of law, and also the ease of law. That is how the law actually works. This is a very interesting way, because we can look at it in the sense that law can be seen, according to Robert Alexy, argues that, as Robert Alexy argues, that law can be seen from the outside. Generally, a sociological jurisprudence or law as sociological way of looking at law is generally seen from the outside. As I told you that he was trained in sociology, he has that perspective, but he also doesn't give up the internal perspective of law. That is, as a trained lawyer, he also tries to see what law's normative content is. I don't know how many of you know it, but we know that today there are different legal schools or legal philosophies, we can say, or jurisprudential schools. One is famously called the analytical jurisprudence school, and we have what is also called the natural law school. Then we also have the pragmatist or the realist schools of them. If you look at Ambedkar's thought, he seems to be not able to, we can't locate him in any particular school, though there is something called a pragmatist school of law. Because Ambedkar doesn't want to give up any one particular dimension of law as so therefore this internal perspective and as well as external perspective both play a role in Ambedkar's way of looking at legality in society. Now, what is the importance of, now it's obvious that Ambedkar has been engaging with law, but Ambedkar later comments that law is one of the most important things for a society. In this sense, Ambedkar is not moving towards this anarchic or anarchist perspective or a very Marxist perspective of laws, where law is seen as essentially an oppressive institution. Law for Ambedkar is very, very important for a society. Now, what is law? Law for him is basically the rules and regulations, the fundamental rules and regulations that govern a particular society. And there is morality that governs a society, but laws are where there is less of a choice, right? Law is different from morality in the sense that law does not give you a choice in the, so law in the sense is a forced enforcement of rules. So that is his fundamental understanding. And but this forced enforcement of rules and regulations is essential for any society that gives up law, trying to avoid law, or try to not implement law, is moving towards, he calls it the grammar of anarchy. So now the question comes is, what is the relationship between law and morality? Ambedkar is trying to say many things at the same time, but as a trained lawyer, he tends to certainly see the difference between law and morality. As I was trying to say, that the analytical school of jurisprudence makes the distinction between law and morality. These are also called positivist theories of law. While natural school of law, or natural theories of law, they do not separate they do not make the distinction, or they say that law and morality are essentially related. So Joseph Raz, H.L.A. Hart, Hans Kelsen, all these main analytical jurisprudential jurisprudents argue for the separation between law and morality. As a lawyer, we see that in Ambedkar's writings, in certain comments he makes about law, he tends to see that law and morality are two separate things, but at the same time, they have a relationship. In that sense, we can say that Ambedkar sometimes seems to be speaking like a positivist who believes in the separation between law and morality. But at the same time, when he's critiquing particularly the Manusmriti, because for Ambedkar, Manusmriti is the ancient lawgiver, and he's the lawgiver that Ambedkar, we all know, that famously attacks, and he's all his life, he, from his initial paper presentation castes in India, and later on to almost to his later work Buddha and Dhamma, his principal ideological opponent is Manu. And one of the interesting aspects about Ambedkar is, because at least what we can see is that Ambedkar is, since he is not trying to tell what law is, we can try to deduce, what I am trying to deduce is what law is not. Because through his critique of Manusmriti, we can come to know that Ambedkar is criticizing that Manusmriti is not law at all, though it parades itself as law. So there is a work by Robert Alexie, that Argument from Injustice. Ambedkar's begins by attacking, obviously, that Manusmriti, he cites by, in fact, he uses the phrase, the lawlessness of Manusmriti. Now, the question is, at one point, and sometimes he tends to be saying that Manusmriti is the real law that works in our society. At some other times, he tends to say that Manusmriti is not law at all. So, therefore, we have to also see in Ambedkar's thought the relationship between law and religion. One of the aims of my talk is also to answer to the question that there has been questions which have been raised by people, that what did Ambedkar think by law? Is law powerful enough to bring about social change or social transformation? And some of his writings, or some of his claims, or some of his sayings tend to say that, show that Ambedkar is trying to prove that law is a very powerful force, right? At the same time, his conversion to Buddhism in the last part of his life seemed to see that law also has its limitations. So how does one see this contradiction? At one point, he tends to see that law is very powerful. At the same time, he sees that law is not as powerful to bring about the desirable social change or social equality that he's aiming. So my aim is to solve this puzzle by trying to understand his conception of law. That's one of the aims. So in his so in fact, let me go back, that in his initial writings, that he says that Manu, coming back to the question of what Ambedkar, coming to the Ambedkar's critique of Manusmriti, we shall first go to his famous piece, as a paper presented in Caste in India, their Mechanism, Genesis and Development. He says that Manu, the lawgiver of India, if he did exist, was certainly an audacious person. if the story he gave, the law of caste be credited, then Manu must have been a daredevil fellow, and the humanity that accepted his dispensation must be a humanity quite different from the one we are acquainted with. So Ambedkar is certainly not crediting Manu for creating the caste system or originating the caste system. But Ambedkar is telling is that Manu, through his book Manusmriti or Manu Dharmashastra, is rationalizing or legitimizing the caste system or giving the rationale behind the caste system. So therefore, in that sense, he again critiques Manusmriti. And in that sense, for Ambedkar, law can function as an ideology. Law as an ideology is something that ideology can be used in a neutral way and also in the Marxist way as false consciousness. But particularly when he's criticizing Manusmriti, he's using ideology in this false consciousness sense, in the sense ideology means the set of ideas or a group of ideas through which one sees reality. That is what is an ideology. But a false consciousness conception of ideology will argue that a set of ideas are offered to the public or offered to the society, where the society accepts these false ideas that are harmful to themselves. So in that sense, one has an ideology that is harmful to oneself. In this sense, Manusmriti creates this, Manusmriti hides its ideology behind legality and this. And this ideology also takes the support of religion. Therefore, Manusmriti is not simply a sacred law, a secular law, but a sacred law. So the source of this ideology is certainly religion. And Ambedkar argues that by hinging the authority, by hinging the moralness of law, by linking it to Vedas and by the source of Vedas, Manu is not giving a choice to the reader to opt out of this system. In fact, in Manusmriti, if you cannot use logic to question Manusmriti, and now he says that what is the purpose of Manusmriti? What is the ideology behind Manusmriti? Obviously, from Ambedkar's point of view, is that apart from its moral wrongness, the goal of Manu is clearly to privilege the Brahmins, to privilege the to give all the privileges and all the powers and privileges to the Brahmins, and to deprive Shudras of all their basic rights and this. Now, then Ambedkar goes in detail about how this goes on, because for example, I don't have time to go into that. For example, take the law of murder, for example. For example, he says a law has essentially need to be equal. For example, for the same crime, there should be same punishment. But if a Brahmin commits a murder, the punishment is much less severe than the punishment is that for that of a Shudra. If the Shudra commits a crime against a Brahmin, the punishment is higher compared to a Brahmin giving a punishment to a Shudra. Now, let me digress a bit. Why Ambedkar is picking up Manusmriti itself? As I was trying to, as I hinted before, that in the Peshwa rule, these laws were actually implemented. In fact, until 1920s in Kashmir also, the laws for the Kashmiri Pandits and the laws for the Muslims, who are also considered as Malichas or Shudras by the Pandit class, was the same. So Ambedkar is is engaging with a very familiar kind of counter attacks we get against Ambedkarites. Is that Manusmriti was not a serious text, no one seriously takes him, or that it's not an important text, or it's not a central text. But Ambedkar is at pains, because these arguments were offered at in these times too. So there are these two thoughts. One is to either say it's not important, or to start rationalizing, or to justify what some alternate moral explanations are given to justify the logic behind the Manusmriti. But initial strategy, which a popular strategy, is to say that Manusmriti is not an important text. Now, Ambedkar argues that whenever there was a Hindu rule, the attempt has been to implement the caste system. Now, one small clarification. It is not that the caste system has been implemented literally everywhere. He's more interested in the ideology behind it. It's whenever the Hindu rulers got a chance or were in power, they tried to implement it. Of course, they did not implement it exactly. There might have been changes, different historical periods, but the basic logic of privileging the Brahmin, privileging the upper caste, particularly the Brahmins, that logic is something that is remained. That is why he sees Manusmriti as his ideological opponent, not because it was actually practiced in literal terms. So a lot of the times people criticize them, saying that this was not practiced in real life or something. But whenever there was a chance, that privileging of the Brahmin, and then for now we know that most of us know that the privileging of the Brahmin is linked to the karma theory of karma, right? Where your past actions have a bearing on your present life, and your present actions have a bearing on your future life. Therefore, this causality of action, therefore, there is a justification that, the causality doesn't end with death. Causality continues when this sense. So in that sense, the Manu justifies the privilege that a Brahmin has because he or she has come from what we call previous, this is the merit of his previous doings, or the previous janmas or previous births doings. But at the same time, he is seriously focusing, or the Manu is seriously focusing on trying to who marries whom. You must have heard of Anuloma and Pratiloma marriages. So at one side, he's trying to argue that your birth is based on your previous actions or previous life actions. At the same time, he's very, very serious who is marrying whom and what kind of a progeny is produced and what quality of a progeny is produced. So this, Ambedkar argues, is nothing but an ideology to privilege the Brahmin, because a Brahmin can marry a Kshatriya, Vaishya and a Shudra, but a Vaishya can only marry a Vaishya, a Shudra, but a Vaishya cannot marry a Brahmin. So this kind of a logic is something that Ambedkar believes is certainly not law. In this sense, in the ideal sense, that is what I would call the internal perspective of law. Law, from his odd sense, has to be fundamentally linked to morality. And morality for Ambedkar fundamentally assumes equality. This is something, so morality in a sense is this where he's highly influenced by J.S. Mill's work, and therefore this sense of equality and justice are deeply linked concepts, and any legal system or any moral system, so-called moral system, that digresses from equality. Of course, equality is not this formal equality. We'll also deal with it also deals with equity in the sense of substantive equality. So this privileging of the Brahmin is something that Ambedkar says is a fundamental violation of morality, and violation of morality is also automatically a violation of law. So therefore, that is why he calls it the lawlessness of Manusmriti. Therefore, it projects itself as law, it parades itself as law, but it is not law either. So therefore, so he talks about marriage laws, he talks about punishment laws, he talks about all these laws, about how Manusmriti is a violation of what he calls justice. Again, justice is again what I said, justice is equality. Justice, morality, and equality for Ambedkar are interchangeable in a sense. So violation of equality is violation of morality and also justice. But he also criticizes Manusmriti for another violation, which is also thinks is important for justice, is utility. This is something very surprised. This is something not very comfortable to post-Rawlsians, because we make a distinction between deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics, and most of us, particularly influenced by Rawls and Dawkins and all this, we think that this Kantian approach, that right and the distinction between right and the good, but the pragmatist tradition does not make this distinction between, it makes the distinction, but it says the sources deep down are the same. So in the deviant ethics too, this both are important. One cannot be chosen against the other. But most of our training post roles is to generally prefer the what we call the deontological side, and the so-called consequentialist ethics is something. But Ambedkar doesn't want to give up on both, and he thinks both utility and justice, utility can be part of justice, and so he criticizes Manusmriti of also violating the principle of utility. That's very, very interesting. Most of us know that it violates inequality and justice, but he's also saying, what is the purpose? What is the utility? What is the cost that society is trying to pay for this thing? So therefore, from that, what I call, as Robert Alexie calls, an argument from injustice, we can come to what justice is or what law is for Ambedkar. For Ambedkar, law fundamentally has to be egalitarian. If it is not, then it is a pseudo law in that sense. Egalitarian in principle and in spirit. If it violates it, then it's a pseudo law. That's what I've been saying. That's in the normative ideal sense. And efficacy, utility is much more about the efficacy of this aspect. But now, ideally, law has to deal with equality. But why does the question now is that though he makes the laws, though he writes the constitution, but somewhere down the line he's skeptical about the efficacy of the laws, the egalitarian laws that are enacted in India, and also the justice that Dalits or minorities or groups will get in real time. So Ambedkar is not daydreaming. He knows the reality, and he talks extensively in his writings about how biases the judges are, how caste biases the judges are, and he's not in that sense daydreaming. He knows the reality. So in that sense, his sociological understanding of law is very, very kicks in, and he deals with this question about the efficacy of law. So somewhere down the line, the law needs to be accepted by the society. And that is where he sees one of the biggest hurdles for these things. So then he goes to the critique again back to Hinduism, because Hinduism, or what he thinks, the Vedic ideology, the ideology of inequality, that it is there. So therefore, he spends a lot of time, in fact, in his life, he spent a lot of time dealing with the philosophy of religion and studying various religions. He claims to have read claims to have done an extensive study compared to anyone around about religion. But he was also influenced by, in his anthropology, by a man called Franz Boas, a very famous anthropologist. And because remember, in sociology and studied in America was also highly influenced by anthropologists. So Ambedkar also looks at religion and law anthropologically, and particularly religion. And then he sees that religion is a very, very powerful force in society. And he says, one of his very famous lines is, religion makes you love the truth, while philosophy only deals with the truth. Philosophy deals with making you know the truth, but what is important is to fall in love with the truth. That's what religion makes. This is very similar to what Hegel says, that truth is the way religion deals with truth is through feeling, while philosophy deals with logic and rationality. So in that sense, this is where the conviction that religion gives is. So when Manusmriti hinges itself on religious ideology and the hierarchy of human beings, that Brahmins are superior and so and so, and from God comes the Brahmins, and from God itself comes the Shudras and all this, that makes it a very, very powerful ideology. It's not simply a secular ideology like what we moderns have, but it's a religious ideology and religious. So therefore, for Ambedkar, Manusmriti is both law and also religion. It cannot be neatly separated as only law and also religion. And he says in other writings that in Hinduism is nothing but law. So Hinduism is not a religion which can be separated from law. Therefore, in fact, the word dharma also can mean morality, law, and also religion. The word captures that. So therefore, in the Indian context at least, or probably in the traditional European context also, law and morality and religion are combined into one. So that's where Ambedkar wants to uh, somewhere down the line see the power of law can only be increased or enforced when it can be linked with a religion. And that is the reason I would argue that not because he is unhappy with law in the sense, or he thinks that though he is unhappy with law, he still thinks law is important. But if it is backed by religion like Buddhism, and the values behind that religion, he believes or he argues extensively that is fundamentally egalitarian in nature. It's an egalitarian philosophy. At least it tries to be egalitarian to its, though there are issues of gender and there, but its main ideological focus is on egalitarian this thing. Therefore, he wants to back the secular law and a kind of way converting the modern secular law by backing with Buddhism. And Buddhism itself is a religion which is unique to itself because it is atheistic in nature. It is not dogmatic in the sense Ambedkar writes in Buddha and Dhamma that Buddha is arguing to accept his philosophy based on reason or based on conviction of on his ability to persuade you, rather than he doesn't claim to be the son of God or prophet or any other kind. So it's a very human religion, and therefore it has a kind of a secular feature within it. So that is one of the reasons that Ambedkar is also choosing Buddhism. And Buddhism also for Ambedkar doesn't question the scientific temper either. In his Buddha and Dhamma, he's talking about that because Buddhism as a religion is focused on dealing with the existential questions or the to solve human problems. It is not there to tell the truth in the sense of what is there, whether the God exists or not, how big the universe is. He argues that science can explain to us. But Buddhism as a religion is a kind of a therapeutic way of living life. So therefore, these values of equality and values of dignity and also compassion, all these things, when they are supported or what we call baked with law, then that law becomes, law's efficacy will improve. Therefore, what I'm trying to argue is that it is not a kind of a disappointment with law that Ambedkar is moving towards Buddhism, but in fact I'm saying that it is his belief in law, and it's a kind of a dialectical move, that the next move that he wants to do is to strengthen law. So Buddhism is something that is coming to support the law rather than something that is oppositional to the legal system. So therefore, in this sense, the egalitarian framework that Ambedkar is fighting for or is introducing in the Constitution is carried over into the egalitarian religion in that sense. So I don't know how much time I have. I'm not been focusing. Can you tell me how much time I have?
Krishna, you have another 10 minutes.
Okay. So I will be now trying to wind up, and I'll pick up where in the question answer session. So broadly, Ambedkar also has both this, because before 1960s there was no this distinction, this clear schools of thought called analytical jurisprudence of thought or a natural school of thought. In their earlier trainings in 1930s, 1940s, these clear distinctions of positivism and anti-positivism or these things were not so clear. So they did not separate. So these distinctions were not there in Ambedkar's thought either. But his engagement with law, his experience as a lawyer, makes him do all these distinctions. So in that sense, he retains the positivist aspect of the separation between law and morality, because one of these arguments, one of the things, that's where his jurisprudence, he says the ethics of jurisprudence are different from the ethics of morality or the rules of jurisprudence. So one of the rules that Ambedkar reiterates and stresses is the what is called the stare decisis. In that sense, a judgment has to agree with, or what we call agree with, or should be compatible with earlier judgment. This is called precedence in legal in law courts, right? Most of in common law traditions, any new judgment has to somehow come in agreement with the previous judgment. In fact, he goes on to say that even if there is some element of injustice in the previous judgments or previous judgments, still the judge should try to stick to the basic principles that were invoked in previous judgments. In that sense, he certainly sees that the logic that works within jurisprudence is very different from the logic that works in morality. Therefore, he is not collapsing jurisprudence or with morality, but at the same time, one can also criticize. You can see morality can be metaethical in a sense, where certain jurisprudences can be questioned, particularly the jurisprudence within course, the jurisprudence Manusmriti can be questioned with the morality of equality. And one of the most important criteria for judging a good religion for Ambedkar is fraternity. For Ambedkar, religion is nothing but fraternity. So therefore, and that's where Manusmriti and Hindu religion violates this fundamental principle of fraternity, because most of the religions are trying to bring together the people to worship or to relate to something. Hinduism is a religion that breaks the fraternity, in that sense, that breaks. So in that sense, he doesn't call it a religion either. Therefore, Hinduism is neither religion, neither law, but it parades as both. So that's a very, very powerful critique against Hinduism. And so in the end, it is an ideology that is there to only privilege the Brahmins, or to make what he calls the Bhudevas of earth, the Brahmins as the Bhudevas earth. So to sum up, for Ambedkar, law is very, very important, and that is one cannot escape from law, because a society without law degrades into anarchy. So therefore, law is important. The law should emerge from the egalitarian values, or from equality is the essence of law. And the law, if it has to be effective, or if it has to work in society, it has to be supported by a moral psychology of the citizens who accept that equality, and that moral psychology can come from the religion Buddhism. So with that, I will conclude my talk, and hopefully I can engage with question and answer session. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dara, for this very rich lecture on Ambedkar, and also, the possibility of reading. Anshika, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. And also the possibility of reading another aspect of the rich thought that Ambedkar is invoked with. The possibility of reading the legal thinker in Ambedkar. I will quickly summarize some of the key arguments that you've made in your brilliant presentation, brilliant lecture. You've started with Ambedkar's understanding of law, the ambiguity of tracing the conception of law, but also the possibility of identifying his notion of law vis-a-vis his critique of what is considered as the ancient system of law, the reading of Manusmriti, and how it is antithetical to the notion of equality and equal selfhood. And despite being a system of law, despite being a framework of law, how it is not inclusive, how it is exclusive. And also, the rich sort of context in which Dr. Dara, you've presented Ambedkar, it was very helpful for us to look at these dimensions, because, many of our students are fairly new to this debate. So also it was a master class on, the conception of law from the perspective of political theory, but also from the thought perspective. So thank you so very much. I have some questions, queries actually, but I would keep these questions towards the end. We have some students. Actually, there's a question already in the chat box. Can we also say Dr. Ambedkar was a social engineer too? Would you like to read Dr. Ambedkar as a social engineer? And the other aspect, and if anyone else has a question, you can write it in the chat box, or you can put an X so that you can ask your question orally. Thank you.
I think I will first deal with the questions that are in the chat box one by one. Then we can pick up questions online, right? Is that fine?
We can do that.
Yeah.
There is another question. Would you want to take two questions, Dr. Dara?
Yeah, I mean, shall we deal with the chat questions later, or verbal?
We can start taking these questions if you like, and wait for those who want to ask for after these answers.
Yeah. Shall I answer meanwhile some questions? One of the questions which I see by Vicky Jha: what is the difference between law and morality according to Ambedkar? Probably I said it, but I'll repeat. The difference between law and morality is law, in a sense, is a force. Law doesn't give you a choice to whether to follow it or not. Morality is more a kind of an inner force that you can choose not to follow it, but if in morality, but if you don't choose it, you can have a problem of conscience and other things. It's a kind of an inner force, but law is an outer force that if whether you believe in a particular law or when you believe whether the law is right or wrong, the society enforces it on you. Therefore, it's a force. So that is why for Ambedkar, law and morality have to be linked, because if you are forcing an individual, or if you're taking away the freedom of an individual, then it better be moral, or it better be justified as moral. It better to be grounded in morality, because what is the legitimacy for taking a person's freedom, right? It has to be only coming from some moral source. Otherwise, it is violation. So therefore, law in that sense is force, or particularly from external. Morality is something that is coming from within, that tells you to do something right or wrong. That's the fundamental difference between law and morality. This question about Dr. Ambedkar was a social engineer too. Now, generally the term social engineer, at least in the olden days, was a negative term. I do not know whether you are using the term social engineer in the sense of a negative things that someone is trying to shape or engineer anything, or probably with some hidden agenda or something like that. But if you are using the term engineer in the positive sense, in the sense of wanting to change society, and obviously we all would want some change in society, or someone want radical changes in society. So that Ambedkar in this sense wants to change society or push society towards a more egalitarian goal of equality, because inequality is fundamentally immoral. So therefore, if we want to move towards a moral society, an ideal society and a useful society, where a society that is not harmful to itself, then we have to move towards egalitarian society in every aspect of our life. So in that sense, he desires this change. You can call him an engineer if you like it. Yeah.
Can we have, if anyone has a question, you can put X in the in the chat box, or you could ask your question directly.
Okay.
So if we wait for more questions, can I just share some of my queries? These are actually just, trying to draw some kind of parallel in the larger, emancipatory trajectory of the Indian intellectual history, Krishna.
Yeah.
And during your presentation, I was trying to sort of think, because I've been working with women thinkers, and I'm trying to look at how women thinkers were mapping the larger normative. And I could find a lot of resonance between what Ramabai was actually writing in The High Caste Hindu Woman, which is actually a very scathing critique of the Brahminical patriarchy. But also for my presentation today, working on her autobiography, Memories of Our Inexhaustible Treasure, in which she's basically giving the argument for her choice for converting to Christianity, and what is it that she read in sort of Christianity that was central to her notion of the emancipation, of what she understood as central to creating a certain kind of agency for the female subjecthood. So that kind of resonance. But the other person who fits brilliantly with Ambedkar's critique of Manusmriti as the ancient system of law is Tarabai Shinde. Because if you think about her Stri Purush Tulna, Krishna, she's actually asking similar questions about how the rule of law or the framework of law, which has come to us in the form of the Shastras, or which has come to us in the form of the Vedic literature and in the form of Manusmriti, is actually problematic. It's not just problematic, but it is not worthy of being a framework of rule of law. Yeah. So that, and also Krishna, just curious, because we share we share common interest in Ambedkar's Buddhism, and his framework. Because if you read Buddha and his Dhamma, the manner in which he's writing it, it's a very new interpretation, Navyan, new interpretation. But he's also positioning Buddhism as a rule of law. Especially the category with which you concluded your lecture today on Maitri, on fraternity, as being so central, Karuna and Maitri. Yeah. So your views on Buddha and his Dhamma as a framework of rule of law, and also trying to sort of extend the kind of argument that Ambedkar is presenting vis-a-vis his view on rule of law, and these two Maharashtrian women, Tarabai Shinde and Ramabai, critiquing this system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. First, my response is that at least our generation and most of us, we have forgotten, or we have somehow lost it, that the power that Manusmriti had on Indian society. Phule and this society which we are talking about, Tarabai Shinde, these laws were not some imaginary laws or some books of the past which had no effect on the present. These laws, they had to live these laws, particularly because in fact Ambedkar writes that the British rule was democratic. The rule of law of British was democratic compared to Peshwa law. So in that sense, Ambedkar is saying that the British at least had rule of equity, equality, equity, or so another word for equity is justice for Ambedkar. So in fact, Ambedkar is telling that the British law was just compared to the Peshwa law. So from their point of view, people living who just were coming out of the Peshwa law, they were experiencing change. British law was really progressive, was really democratic. They were treating it as equals. So in that sense, we need to retrieve that sense. That's where they're not in that sense simply intellectually saying it. They have experienced. In fact, you look at Uma Chakravarti's work about how father was punished for aborting his child's these were all laws implemented, and the source of these laws are Dharma Shastras, and you can also see the experience in Kashmir about how these laws were there. That's how I would add to what you were saying about what Tarabai Shinde is saying. In that sense, it's real for them. It's not for us. Manusmriti is some book we read somewhere else, but for them it was real. Then coming to Buddhism as law, as we're saying that the Buddhism is by and large can be seen as a moral philosophy or a way of life, partly dealing with ethical again not ethics used in a very limited sense, because it has Maitri, compassion, and Karuna. In fact, we should extend our Karuna towards animals too, right? That's what is something. So therefore, it's a very holistic way of dealing with it. It doesn't again make us divide between virtue ethics, deontological ethics, or consequentialism. It has a very different. So that's what is attractive for Ambedkar. And plus, it also, at least in the Indian arena or Indian spaces, it also is accepted as a religion. Generally, it is seen as a school of thought. It's accepted as a religion, and there have been histories of its success in some parts, and at least in Indonesia, travels to Thailand, and other Ambedkar travels Sri Lanka. So this, in that sense, this inner law that it motivates you from within, because religion, particularly most of the laws that are sources where the source is religion, take for example Sharia or other laws, where the people follow it not out of an external force like a law imposing authority, but something that is followed from within. So Buddhism is something that can give us this inner source where inner source to follow the rules. In that sense, we can see it as law, but law not in the sense that is external to the individual, but that can be the law ultimately for Ambedkar has to be accepted by the people, and that was one of the biggest anxieties, even as a when he resigns as a law minister, right? So how to make people accept the law is probably Buddhism can help us in that way. Yeah.
There are 2 questions in the chat box, Krishna. Sir, was Dr. Ambedkar against the concept of Hinduism apart from Brahmin ideology, as his followers nowadays are found targeting or criticizing Hinduism logically or illogically?
Was Dr. Ambedkar against the concept of Hinduism apart from Brahmin ideology, as his followers nowadays as are founding target or criticizing Hinduism? I didn't get exactly what he means by the second part, founding target. I mean, you're saying that people are attacking Hinduism on this, or
Shivendra, would you want to ask your question in person?
the first part I got it.
Yeah.
Excuse me, ma'am. Actually, it was a typing glitch. My question is that his followers nowadays are being found criticizing Hinduism at different aspects apart from Brahminical ideology. So my question is that he was at core point he was against Hinduism, or at only Brahminical point of view?
Yeah, so in his if you look at his writings, one thing that Ambedkar is saying, particularly in later life, is that there is no one fixed definition of what Hinduism is or what Hinduism is. There is no agreement. Broadly, it is said it's a way of life. And when it is a way of life for Ambedkar, then in the way of life, if you go from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, or largely, there's a particular patterns that are common there, and that is what where he sees is the caste system, and the caste system is linked to the theory of karma or the law of karma theory, which is generally accepted mostly in India, and that is generally seen as one of the basic what you call basic fundamentals of Hinduism, and if you want to call it as the fundamentals of Hinduism. So there have been many versions of Hinduism, or many schools of thought. Ambedkar does not reject all schools of thought. For example, Samkhya, and there are schools. In fact, there were egalitarian movements within Hinduism also. But what is important for Ambedkar is what parades itself as Hinduism, or what is Hinduism, is deep down dominated by this Brahminical ideology, or the ideology of inequality. So even if it is not Brahminical, if it has elements of inegalitarian tendencies, like if, for example, how fundamental is the aspect that from the god head comes the Brahmins, or from the legs comes the Shudras. So if you say these are not important, so what is left of Hinduism? What is Hinduism in that sense? So therefore we can we go to the bigger debate what Hinduism itself is, but for him, but most important is the ideology that justifies privilege of one class over the other, or one caste over the other, or the rest actually. That is part one. And yeah, so people tend to make a distinction between Hinduism is different and Brahminical ideology is different. I don't know. They're trying to make a lot of distinction, but there are a lot of counter strategies to Ambedkar's attack, and this counter attack most of the time is obfuscating the arguments, or misinterpreting themselves, and claiming that the opposite group has misinterpreted. There are a lot of rhetorical strategies that are involved both within the academia and in society. So it's a very complex process. Yeah. Another question is, what was his view on Marxist analysis of law? That law is part of the superstructure, not the base. This is by Chandan Kumar. Chandan, is a very interesting question and a very important question. It's very fascinating that Ambedkar's training in Bombay and also in London and also in this, most of his life he was a student of economics. Most of his life he was a student of economics, but very rarely, except in one work, Buddha and Marx, is attracted towards Marxism in total. And a person coming from one of the most deprived groups in human history, he naturally should be moving towards a Marxist kind of an ideology in both. But Ambedkar, somewhere down the line, does not buy Marxism completely. Particularly, he criticizes its economic determinism. That is where his idea of ideology, that is his, how he sees Manusmriti as an ideology. Therefore, it's something that comes from above and imposed it from below. So the ideology of Manusmriti doesn't come from below to up, like base superstructure. Ambedkar is more like Gramsci. Interestingly, both were born in the same year, 1891. So the superstructure also can has an effect, right? There's a dialectical relation between base and superstructure, and in the sake of Manusmriti, particularly the ideology is being pushed down from top to bottom. So in that sense, probably Ambedkar thought that Marxists have not given the equal importance to ideology. Of course, they believe in false consciousness, but again, he would agree with a lot of Marxist analysis, but again, this basing everything on economic thing, he would not completely agree with it. And that's a surprising answer from one of the most well-trained economists in India, right? He's not accepting an economic determinism in that sense. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay. Krishna, do you want to say something, some last?
I will just say that thanks a lot for inviting me and giving me.
No, Krishna, that we will do. The vote of thanks waits. But would you like to say something, some closing remarks on, the possible readings that you would suggest to our students that, we should encourage, or they should encourage others and friends to sort of get a sense?
Yeah. I would probably recommend this what is Brain S. Tamanaha's work, the Realist School of Law, or Realist School of Law, Realist Perspectives of Law. Or you can also read John Dewey's Pragmatist Conceptions of Law, because these conceptions of law have been sidelined because main debates are between analytical jurisprudence versus this natural law theories, and on the importance of utilitarianism in law, because pragmatism has a relationship with utilitarian tradition too, and so it doesn't entirely give up utilitarianism, and also accepting some of Kantian ethics. So this is where, if you want to understand Ambedkar's conception of law, one needs to understand the pragmatics and also the sociological approaches to law. Sociological approach to law works related to and also there is a historical school of law, which is Henry Maine. You have to look at the work of that. And I don't know whether you're introduced to Ronald Dworkin's Law's Empire. In fact, in my paper, I have written, they didn't have the time to talk about. Ronald Dworkin is one of those who sees the moralness of law, the link between law and morality. If you want to study a bit more complex, bit more higher, read the work of Robert Alexy, An Argument from Injustice. And that's where I get inspired from to look at how Ambedkar's conception of justice or law comes from his critique of, or his negatively, we derive justice from injustice, right? He tries to argue by looking at what he calls injustice. I'm trying to argue what he means by justice, right? So we are deducing it from that. So in that sense, I've got this inspiration on Robert Alexy's work, An Argument from Injustice. And then there is something also he argues, Robert Alexy calls the correctness of law. So from the internal perspective, there is a question of the validity of law, the correctness of law, externally the efficacy of law. But any judge who's making a judgment has to somewhere down the say that It is not just the law, it is a correct law. So therefore, Robert Alexis says one cannot delink law from morality. 3, law, again, morality can be both subjective and objective. Alexis is also talking about the objective morality is something that is very, very important. So for Ambedkar too, morality is not entirely subjective. It is not neither relative. There is some objectivity to morality. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a very extensive reading list. I have to read them. Now I would request Professor Shubha Rao to give the formal vote of thanks.
I'm simply what to say, fascinated by your depth of reading and your depth of understanding the problem that you have tackled, Dr. Dara. It's very, very, what to say, enlightening. Your lecture has been a very enlightening one. I have certain, it was deeply, this thing, arresting so far as our attentions are concerned. You just now mentioned that social engineering was considered to be a bad thing, but I was immediately reminded of Plato's ideas on family, communism of family and property. And ironically, it was not presented as something bad, but something very desirable by a philosopher like Plato. And secondly, yes, but so it was not, at that time, it didn't get the name of social engineering. It's a newly coined word, you are right. And now, most of the times really after the fascist and the Nazi, phenomena, it has been a very, very, what to say, a very scary type of a word, with very dangerous implications for the entire society. And secondly, Dr. Dara, you said, and Dr. Priyanka also said this, fraternity and Maitri are almost synonymous, as it appeared to me by Dr. Priyanka and your statements. But it's not that exactly. Fraternity and Maitri are two different emotions. And because fraternity has a ring of blood relationship of kinship, and fraternity doesn't have any such rings around it, and it's a more developed or cultivated or a more generous attitude towards the fellow dwellers or fellow countrymen or fellow society people. So this just came to my mind. But notwithstanding these small interventions, overall, it was a very, very pleasant, a very thought-provoking and very enlightening lecture that you gave, and especially coming from a very young social scientist, it was all the more encouraging for our students. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Priyanka, for your very valid interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Krishna, for taking our invitation so promptly and speaking to our students and inspiring them, and also as part of the larger history of ideas and political thought. We are trying to revive some of the significant debates that have shaped the idea of India. So thank you so very much. And on a personal note, we share an intellectual affinity. We also share the same supervisor. So Krishna is my Guru Bhai in the traditional vernacular sense. But thank you so much. And it's always an inspiration and inspiring to hear you, Krishna. And it was today as well. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for the Department of Political Science, and particular special thanks to Professor Shubha Rao and Dr. Priyanka and all the students who have been patiently listening to me and giving me this chance, and also trying to understand what I'm trying to say. Actually, I was dealing with, I felt it's a very complex matter trying to do that, but thanks for your patience once again. See you in the future. Yeah. Bye.